Hello, everyone. Welcome to EP Lunchtime Chats. This is the program where we give you a little picture into what it's like behind the scenes at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. The four people you see on your screen are educator performers. And when we're not out there educating and performing, we have some interesting conversations. Today, we're going to talk about epic fails of science, or epic fails of scientists is usually where the failure happens. With me today, and they're going to introduce themselves and talk about a little bit about their favorite epic science fail. We have Molly.
Hey guys. So mine is about this guy named Alexander Fleming a long time ago. He was a really messy lab assistant, which I kind of connect to if you could see the rest of my living space. But he would leave like glasses and petri dishes all over his desk. He went on vacation for 2 weeks and came back and found like all this mold had grown everywhere, as it does. But in this one petri dish, the mold was actually attacking this bacteria. And from that kind of messy fail, he discovered antibiotics and penicillin, which is pretty important and pretty special. So thanks, messy people, for that.
Thanks, Molly. And we also have Chris.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris, and today's discussion about a science fail takes me all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century, to Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was working on his new theory of gravitation, which had a series of equations that could describe the universe as a whole. One of those equations is called the field equation. Let me show you what it looks like. The two equations you see up here, there's one on the top and the one on the bottom. The top one was the one that he first proposed back in 1915. That one right there. And of course, at the time, what was very fashionable about what astronomers thought that the universe was like was that the universe was more or less static. It wasn't getting bigger, it wasn't getting smaller, it was staying the same size. But in Albert Einstein's equation at the top, he kept getting solutions that required the universe to expand, to change its size over time. He wasn't so sure whether or not that would be was correct or not, so he put in a kind of number to prevent his equations to produce solutions that would make the universe expand. It's called the cosmological constant, and it's just a number. And 2 years after he proposed that first equation, he proposed this one in 1917 to make sure all of his universes stayed the same size with all time. In a lot of ways, it was a little bit of a fail because a few years later, in 1926, Edwin Hubble would discover the expansion of the universe. Edwin Hubble confirmed something that Albert Einstein had theoretically predicted years before. Albert Einstein called this one of the greatest blunders of his scientific career. But he's Einstein, right? So he's kind of failing upwards, right? In introducing the cosmological constant, which is shown right here by that funny looking term, he actually has solutions in his equations that also not only made the universe stay the same size, but there were solutions that allowed the universe to not only expand, but to accelerate as it got bigger. That is to say that as it got larger, the rate at which it was increasing its size was increasing. And fast forward to 1990, the Hubble Space Telescope and astronomers there had discovered that the universe itself was actually expanding. So in a weird way, Einstein should have trusted himself, theoretically. All of us theoretical physicists are always trying to come up with something that's fundamental about the universe, all with just theory and mathematics. He should have trusted himself, and he didn't. But in not doing so, he actually introduced a term that at first he thought was just a fudge factor, but ended up being something that's actually physical about the universe. Nobody knows exactly what energy is behind the cosmological constant. That's still ongoing work. So that's one of my favorite fails of science for sure. It's one of the biggest blunders, but also one of the greatest fail upwards in physics history, I think.
And that Einstein, right? Epic fail. Jeez. All right, and then we also have Jose.
Hey everybody. Yeah, I went a little different with my epic fail. Mine is about a human ancestor called Piltdown Man, which was reportedly discovered in 1915 by a man named Charles Dawson. Turns out that was a huge hoax that Dawson probably perpetrated himself. And this hoax had a big influence on the science of anthropology up until the 1950s when it was finally exposed. The reason I call this a failure of science is because a lot of Dawson's colleagues didn't really want people outside of Great Britain to examine his findings. And of course, one of the big things in science is peer review. Once his findings were really actually peer reviewed, the hoax was exposed. So it was a failure of doing all of the science, right? Doing that critical peer review step.
All right, wonderful. And this is our panel. And yeah, fails in science. We have to acknowledge that failure is an absolutely essential part of science. Like that's a big part of the process. Most scientists spend most of their careers failing, with a few moments. Finding null results is an incredibly important part of science. For example, Molly, if Alexander Fleming had kept a tidy lab and been up to like today's laboratory cleanliness standards, he never would have discovered penicillin. So Molly, is the lesson here to not clean up after yourself?
Absolutely. That is absolutely it. You don't know what you'll find if you just leave everything a mess. You never know.
And people who are watching on Facebook, I am monitoring the comments. So if you have something you'd like to ask one of our panelists or throw into the conversation, please throw something in there and we will check it and get to it. All right. Somebody, Jennifer, said, much better than my lunch conversations with my cats. So that's great. So there's a lot of different categories of science failures. One of my favorites is when scientists just got too excited, like the Piltdown Man. Chris, I came across one I couldn't really understand. Can you tell us what happened when some scientists thought that they discovered that neutrinos travel faster than light?
Oh, that's a good one. Yes, I can. In fact, those experiments were done not too long ago. I remember there was a facility in Italy where physicists actually had thought that they had measured, they were measuring the speed of neutrinos, which are these really ghostly particles that move through the universe and they hardly interact with any matter around them. Calculations show they can go through light years of lead and not bang into one single lead molecule atom, which is really cool. But one of the things that we wanted to know is whether or not neutrinos can travel faster than light itself. If I remember correctly, that experiment ended up having really bad data and created the illusion that actually the neutrinos are traveling faster than the speed of light. Of course, had we discovered something that was traveling faster than the speed of light, that would be a major breakthrough in physics. As far as we can tell, nothing in all the universe, except for maybe the expansion of space itself, can actually travel faster than light. And I guess the search continues, I guess. I can.
And what was really cool about that paper, this is the part I was able to understand, is when the researchers published it, they put like right at the top of the paper something like, it looks like we found something that goes faster than light. That means either we broke physics or something is wrong in our paper and we can't figure it out. And they put it out to the scientific community at large to try and figure out what they had done wrong. So that was a good fail with an acknowledgement that it was probably a fail. It's also fun. It's not really fair, but it's fun to, oh, we have a question. What are your favorite personal science fails when you have failed? Like I've noticed if you go to YouTube and search for science fails, it's almost all high school physics teachers setting their classrooms on fire. All right, Molly has one.
Well, no, I was talking earlier how I used to teach middle school science. And yeah, you plan for this like really awesome demonstration. You're like, this is it. I'm the cool teacher now. And then you do it in class and it's just like, well, you're like, in my mind, it was a lot cooler. Trust me. Here's all the science and equations. And the kids are just like, oh man, okay.
Chris has one.
Speaking of teaching and fails, yes, I was a physics high school teacher for many years. One summer I was teaching summer school physics to a group of students in California. And I thought it'd be really cool to just do that really cool demonstration for no reason, just really to demonstrate anything physical. But the demonstration of placing Mentos in Diet Coca-Cola. Never really done it before, but I set it up in class and I had only one tiny little Mentos candy, and I dropped it into an entire liter bottle of Diet Coca-Cola inside the classroom. I was surprised by how energetic that reaction is. Okay, it like kind of bursted over. And like stuff kind of hit the ceiling. The ceilings were kind of low, but still, it was at least 10 feet up. So that was fail on two parts. One, I didn't test it first. Two, I wasn't really didn't have anything to really teach at that particular moment. I just wanted to do it. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of sounds like a win, because nothing is going to inspire your kids to like be more interested in physical reactions than watching you make a fool out of yourself like that. Jose, what's your favorite personal science fail?
This happened at the museum, actually. We do experiments with liquid nitrogen at the museum. And I was was going to do a liquid nitrogen demo. I had gotten all the materials ready. We have several experiments that we do, like turning the air inside a balloon liquid so the balloon shrinks, making a tea kettle whistle even though liquid nitrogen is really, really cold, and all sorts of things like that. And one of the things we did in this demo was we made a liquid nitrogen geyser, which is where we put some into a beaker and then put a little nozzle on the end. Because the pressure changes so quickly, the liquid nitrogen sprays out in a big geyser. But I didn't check how much liquid nitrogen I had before I began the demonstration. And so I was down to the very, very, very last little bit of liquid nitrogen that we had. And I got to that big finale, the big geyser at the end, and I only was able to fill up the beaker with maybe a quarter of an inch of liquid nitrogen. So I poured it in there, and I was hoping beyond hope that I would get something, and I put the beaker down on top, and this little puff of smoke was like, and then that was it. I had about 50 people watching me, all really excited. They'd seen all these experiments, and I really talked it up. I'd really built it up. And then just that pitiful little geyser. Yeah, that was definitely a science fail for me.
Yeah, so we've hit on a big point about science fails, where it is usually the scientist who has done something wrong, which is a big thing. Like the famous story is Thomas Edison was asked, "How did you feel after failing 1,000 times to invent a light bulb?" And his response was, "I haven't failed. I just found 1,000 ways that don't work." So failure is a big important part, but sometimes it can be pretty dramatic. Oh, Jose has something to say.
Also, due respect, Thomas Edison had a lot of help. It wasn't like he was just sitting in a lab figuring out the light bulb all on his own. He had a whole team of people helping him. So it's not like he found 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. It's more like he paid a bunch of people to find 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb.
True, that is true, but still, it's a good quote. So, yeah. The other fun way to look at failures of science is, and this is also not fair, we are, to use another famous science quote, Isaac Newton, standing on the shoulders of giants. But what's the fun of standing on the shoulders of giants if you can't look at the people in the past who are standing on shorter giants and make fun of them? So, which we see in medicine, when a lot of times they're like, "You're sick because you got too much blood. Let's get some of that blood out of there." And that was wrong. So I wonder, does anyone have any favorite historical science fails?
Well, I feel like, Piltdown Man is a classic example of a sort of science fail from history. It's easy for us to look back in time and criticize the way that people did things a long time ago. But one of the things we have to remember is that people will probably do that for us in a couple hundred years. So for a lot of things like using leeches to heal you and thinking that perfume will keep you safe from the plague, I try not to be as critical about those types of things because they were working on with what they knew to be true knowledge, and they were still experimenting and learning. I mean, science isn't the type of thing where you just suddenly make a discovery and the whole world changes. It's usually a long and gradual process, which is why I picked Piltdown Man for this, because there's lessons from Piltdown Man. I mean, Charles Dawson probably wanted to be famous. He probably wanted to perpetrate this hoax. At the time, they were looking for the missing link, and they thought that big brains came first and the other ape-like features changed later, when now we know that the opposite is true. And the big lesson from Piltdown Man, he found these ape bones in England, and they were clearly showed a big brain and ape-like teeth and all this kind of stuff. It's not only did he use people's confirmation bias, which is a big problem in science, to make them automatically believe that his findings were more legitimate, but there was also a cultural element of it as well. There was evidence coming out around the same time of human origins being in Africa, and to these upper class British people, that was just absurd. And so, they didn't want to accept the evidence that humans originally came from Africa. So here was this human ancestor, and not only was he European, but he was specifically British, right? Which is why most of the pushback at the time came from outside Britain. But a lot of those Britain scientists didn't want a close examination of those bones. The Germans had Neanderthal man, and the French had Cro-Magnon man, and they had found Java man and Beijing man, Peking man, but they had never been anybody in the British Isles. And so that, I think, is the biggest takeaway, is that, when we talk about people standing on the shoulders of giants, and they also stood on smaller giants and so on and so forth, it's easy for us to immediately go for the jokes, but we have to think about, things that are present for us in our time that are standing in the way sometimes of our scientific progress. That's the biggest lesson, I think.
Those are excellent points, but also Aristotle thought your brain was just a radiator to cool off your blood. So fail. And Molly and Chris, do you have any favorite misconceptions from history scientifically? Go for it, Chris.
Well, one of the ones that just kind of pop out for me in history is just the position of the Earth in the solar system and in the universe. For the longest time, almost for all of human history, people thought that the Earth was at the center of the cosmos, right? And that the sun and the planets went around the Earth. And I guess in a lot of ways, you can't really blame them for feeling that way. Because in some sense, if you look out and use your observation skills, it certainly looks that way, that the Earth is stationary and things go around it. It would take a very, very long time for human beings to build up not only the evidence that that's not necessarily the case and is not true, but also to overcome much of what Jose said. Just sort of the bias that gets into a person's sort of being, just living in a time where you just kind of accept ideas as they were in that time. So yeah, it's a good example for me. It's a good one.
Yeah, and I think that also, like, the geocentric point that Chris brought up, where the Earth is in the center, like, when we think about these historic fails, like, most of them are because they were just using observation. Like, they were just going off, well, this is exactly what I see, this is how it is, which I think is not wrong. Like, I think using observations is really important, because you are seeing patterns and kind of taking them at face value. And I think that's where most of, like, those fails come from, is, well, I'm just looking at it right now. And I still think that gives an important lesson somewhere deep down. I'll let you all figure it out for yourself. I won't teach anyone.
Well, that's a great point. They were actually doing good science to come to those conclusions. They just didn't have telescopes. Go ahead, Jose.
So speaking of Aristotle, one of my favorite explanations that Aristotle had about the world was gravity. And that was actually really rooted in observational science. Aristotle knew that things would roll downhill. He knew that rivers always flowed downhill to the ocean. He knew that heavier things would roll down a hill faster than smaller things. He thought that heavier things would fall faster, which, considering based on his observations, was a reasonable prediction. The only thing he didn't have was the scientific framework to test that and have that peer review. And that's one of the big differences, right? I think the other thing too is his explanation for it was really interesting, because he said he used mathematics. He said that if you get 3 right angles together, that encompasses all the dimensions that we can move in: up, down, left, and right, round and round. And that's true. And he said that means that the world is perfect. So the reason everything rolls downhill is because when you pick up a ball or something, you're removing perfection from the world, and it wants to be perfect. So when you let the ball go, it's going to fall down and try and restore that perfection. That seems ridiculous to us, but when Newton published his Principia and talked about gravity moving the planets, that seemed ridiculous to a lot of people, because it's a force you can't see, hear, smell, taste, touch. At the time that Newton published that book, a lot of people rejected it as magic, as magic, that this magical force was moving the planets around. And it was really the mathematical underpinnings of Newton's calculations that allowed that work to go forward, right? And that was the big difference that was missing between Newton and Aristotle, was that mathematical framework. which is also a part of science.
Yes, excellent points, Jose. Now, there are some fails in science. We're getting down to the end of our thing, so we should just acknowledge that though science, we have to respect history and all these things, but there are certainly scientists. I'm going to do another famous scientist quote. Albert Einstein said, there are two things that are infinite in the the universe and human stupidity, and I'm not sure about the universe. And so definitely there's some scientists who have done some crazy things. Isaac Newton stared directly into the sun so that he could stare at the after image and learn about the sun, and was partially blind for the rest of his life. Einstein spent a lot of the end of his life fighting against quantum mechanics, which I understand personally because I've tried to understand quantum mechanics, and I'm mad too. But let's see, since we're at about the end of our conversation, it's time for a lightning round. We're gonna go around and what, Gesundheit, Jose, what is a disproven or unproven scientific thing that you wish was real? Chris is ready. All right, go Chris.
String theory. String theory. A beautiful mathematical model about multi-dimensional universes that is completely theoretical and is the predictions are way beyond what we can confirm in a laboratory. Our current technology can't really confirm it. An actual string, for example, actually exists in nature, but man, that would be a fantastic thing. That would be great.
Excellent. Molly?
Okay, this is like, I guess, biology based, which is still science, but it's like that Norse myth that every land creature has an animal counterpart. Humans, mermaids, unicorns, narwhals. I would like to see more research on that because I'm not ready to give up on that theory.
I think it goes even farther where there's also a sky counterpart. And one of the big points of evidence, I think it's Pliny the Younger, someone's going to have to check, but an ancient Roman writer. And one of the big pieces of evidence was you have seahorses, and you have horses, and you have Pegasuses. So proof. All right, Jose.
Mine would be reincarnation. I think I really love the idea that your consciousness could be reborn into another form and new experience. I've always thought that idea was really cool. Unfortunately, nothing in science backs that up. But science can only deal with things that are quantifiable, and consciousness is a little kind of rejects quantification. So who knows?
And on Facebook, our colleague Eduardo says he wishes you could drill holes in your skull and release evil spirits, which would be cool. All right, this was incredibly fun. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We will be back next week and the week after that. We're going to be Tuesdays at noon with EP chats. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, let's wave. And then strike a sciencey pose.